Thank you, Doctor, and thank you for your testimony. The question I have is, as we stand right now, there's a moratorium on the well. We're talking about a 5-mile moratorium.
Correct.
However, my district, which is close by, there is application and possibility of 2 injection wells going in. My concern, and I'm sure the concern of some of my constituents, is what is the distance and how long does this fault line go? How far would you put a moratorium from the Youngstown base well into my district or other districts?
It's very difficult to determine how far this fault would extend. And I think both Mr. Stewart and Dr. Chase, or Mr. Stewart for sure, pointed out examples of why this is difficult. The actual information that we have access to does not, well, let me back up. The technology that we have available to us, and we can look at seismic surveys, reflection surveys, 3D seismic surveys, whatever you want to use, the resolution of determining a fault, particularly a high slip fault at 9,000 feet or 12,000 feet depth, is not very great. So you would need some sort, and what I mean by resolution, you would need some sort of a vertical offset, likely in excess of 30 feet. Now, I'm not an expert geophysicist, so I'm probably getting myself into a little bit dangerous area here, but I have worked with geophysical data, and there is a limit on the resolution.
Just as a follow-up, is there a level or a depth that you would say is too deep to go, that now we're getting into where a fault line could be? For instance, if we went down as deep as this is, Youngstown one I understand is a very deep well. Would you recommend then not going so far down, regulations saying limiting at 9,000 feet, because that would then procure possibility of an earthquake?
If all the rock layers and the basement itself were perfectly horizontal, you could set a depth limit. But since the rocks of Ohio dip towards the southeast, and what that means is as you travel to the southeast, things get progressively deeper. You can't set a depth limit. What you can do is look at the types of formations. And when you look at the granite basement rocks, which are known to have faults in them, we just don't know where they are. We know where some of them are, but there's obviously more of them. These rocks are fractured. That's the only type of porosity that they have. If fluids are to migrate into these rocks, they're going to follow those fractures. That's what's available to them, and ultimately may intersect and start working into a fault. So even if the well doesn't penetrate a fault, you have the potential through migration through fractures, which are associated with faults. You cannot fault an igneous rock like granite without fracturing it as well. And so you leave open conduits for this fluid to travel. My thoughts on the issue would be not to complete wells into the Precambrian basement rocks. It's that simple.
Well, how deep is that?
Here in Youngstown, it's about 9,000 feet. You get down near Marietta, you're looking at about 12,000 feet.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, if we don't go that deep, then that 9,000 feet, that would be almost a limit. Anything above that would be satisfactory.
Well, you can't, I want to repeat myself, you can't set a limit because the rocks aren't horizontal. If they're horizontal, you can say 9,000 feet. What you need to do is identify the formations that are not acceptable. And I don't see any reason for ejecting into Precambrian basement rocks. They're not good receptors of the fluids. They don't have good porosity or permeability. And so if you limit these wells so that they do not drill into, or if you have to drill into it to provide a rat hole for doing the measurements on the Mount Simon sandstone that sits directly on top of it, then you need to plug that back, cement it back. You're welcome.
Representative Better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the fact that you're giving some recommendations for us to consider and have other people take a look at and consider as well. Are there any other states that take a look at this type of recommendation where we do go ahead and try to cement over any of these old rat holes?
I'm not familiar with the regulations in other states. I know what we do here in Ohio. And in Ohio, in permitting a Class 2 injection well, the geological information that's available that we have is looked at in the permitting process, just like it is in permitting a production well.
So your recommendation for this process is something that could be done?
Absolutely. We have a pretty good idea of where the Precambrian basement rocks lie. We have quite a few holes that penetrated into it for various reasons. And CoCorp seismic data that was shot some time ago by federal government, that gives you enough basic resolution to determine the depth of it and the overall structure of the formation. It doesn't allow you to identify minor faults like the one that here in Youngstown seems to be.
Who would then pick up the cost for doing that?
Who would pick up the cost? I suppose that would depend on legislators and what type of things that work out. But the cost, you mean, of doing a seismic survey or doing the evaluation of existing data?
That, and also who would be responsible for plugging up the red hole?
Well, that would be the company that's drilling the production, or excuse me, the injection well.
Very good, thank you.
Representative Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me that we're getting a lot of suggestions, and I think that they're great. On the other hand, what can we do to better solidify the information that where we're putting these injection wells are in fact safe places? For instance, we built the peri-nuclear power plant on a fault. You're aware of that. Now we're trying to make a decision legislatively whether we should prevent going into the basement rock or we should ban it. Would you suggest that we only go a certain amount, stay out of the basement rock, and that we do even further studies to determine where we're putting these injection wells?
As I previously stated, if it were up to me, I wouldn't inject fluids via Class 2 injection wells into the Precambrian basement rock. As far as solidifying the data and what can we do additionally, it's important to understand that not all faults are created equal. And these faults, the one that was imaged with the 2 earthquakes that occurred in December, from the geophysical experts at Lamont Doherty Labs, they came up with a minor left lateral fault. I don't know of any technology that exists today that would allow us to identify that. And if we could run these sophisticated seismic surveys, we would spend a lot of money, and I'm not sure that it would provide the information that we want. One of the things that geologists are constantly confronted with is making interpretations based on limited data. And when you're looking at, in this case, the Precambrian basement rocks that are of great depth, 9,000 feet here in the Youngstown area, it's very difficult to know the character, particularly of faults that may exist within that rock, know the character and the location of those. And so, unfortunately, when it comes to drilling these Class 2 injection wells, you can't know, based on the information we have, whether you would intercept a fault if you went into the Precambrian basement. And that's precisely why I recommend that we don't do it. If you need to complete it in Mount Simon, which is a good injection formation, the rat hole that's required to do that needs to be plugged back.